Miranda had always been sensitive to things others couldn't see, but she'd learned to ignore the whispers and fleeting movements in her peripheral vision. That changed when she moved into the Victorian house on Elm Street. On her first night, Miranda saw the shadow child. It stood at the foot of her bed, a small, dark silhouette that seemed to absorb light rather than block it. The figure had the unmistakable shape of a young child, but where its face should have been was only an endless void that made Miranda's eyes water when she tried to focus on it. The shadow child didn't move or speak. It simply watched her with that terrible absence of features. Miranda blinked hard, hoping it was just a trick of moonlight and exhaustion. But when she opened her eyes, the shadow was closer to the bed. Research at the local library revealed the house's dark secret. In 1952, 8-year-old Timothy Walsh had disappeared from his bedroom on the second floor. His parents claimed he'd simply vanished in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a perfectly made bed and a lingering scent of decay that no amount of cleaning could eliminate. The police investigation found evidence of something far more sinister. The basement walls contained traces of lime and small bone fragments. Timothy's father, Edgar Walsh, was arrested but died in custody before trial, claiming until his last breath that the shadow took him. Each night, the shadow child grew bolder. It would stand closer to Miranda's bed, sometimes reaching out with fingers that weren't quite fingers, more like tendrils of living darkness that left cold spots wherever they touched. The temperature in her bedroom began dropping consistently, her breath visible even in summer heat. Miranda tried everything: sage burning, holy water, even sleeping in other rooms. But the shadow child followed her throughout the house, growing larger and more defined with each passing day. She realized with growing terror that it wasn't just watching her, it was feeding off her presence, using her life force to become more solid, more real. The breaking point came on her 14th night in the house. Miranda awoke to find the shadow child sitting on her chest, its void face inches from her own. She could feel her warmth being drained away, her memories becoming foggy and distant. In that moment of clarity before unconsciousness claimed her, she understood the truth. The shadow child wasn't Timothy Walsh's ghost. It was what had taken him, and now it wanted her. When the police found Miranda 3 days later, after concerned co-workers reported her absence, she was standing perfectly still in the basement, her eyes rolled back to show only whites. Her skin was paper pale and cold to the touch, but she was technically alive. She never spoke again, never responded to stimuli, never showed any sign of the vibrant woman she'd once been. But sometimes, visitors to the psychiatric ward reported seeing a small shadow standing beside her bed, growing stronger each day, waiting patiently for the next sensitive soul to move into the house on Elm Street. The cycle would begin again.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
Lysander discovered the antique camera at an estate sale, tucked away in a dusty corner beside moldering books and tarnished silverware. The old woman running the sale seemed eager to get rid of it, practically shoving the ornate mahogany and brass device into his hands for $20. "Belonged to my grandfather," she muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Strange old man. took pictures of things that weren't there. As a professional photographer, Lysander was intrigued by the camera's craftsmanship. It was clearly handmade, with intricate engravings and mechanisms he'd never seen before. Inside the camera body, he found a partially used roll of film, ancient stuff, probably from the 1940s. Curiosity got the better of him. That evening, he developed the existing photos in his darkroom, expecting to find family portraits or scenic landscapes. Instead, the images made his blood run cold. The first photograph showed a family dinner, but everyone at the table was dead. Their eyes were rolled back, their mouths hung open in silent screams, and their skin had the waxy pallor of corpses. Yet their bodies were positioned as if they were having a pleasant conversation, hands reaching for food they could never taste. Each subsequent photograph was more disturbing than the last. A wedding where the bride's head was twisted backward at an impossible angle. A birthday party where the celebrant's chest cavity was torn open, revealing organs that pulsed with unnatural life. A graduation ceremony where every participant was missing essential body parts, limbs, faces, entire torsos. But what truly terrified Lysander was the final photograph on the roll. It showed his own apartment taken from inside his darkroom. He was visible in the image, hunched over the developing chemicals, but his reflection in the darkroom mirror showed something else entirely. A decaying corpse with hollow eye sockets, working frantically on photographs that revealed the truth about everyone around him. Panicked, Lysander tried to destroy the camera and the photographs, but every time he thought he'd succeeded, they would reappear exactly where he'd left them. The camera seemed to be calling to him, begging to be used again. Against his better judgment, he loaded fresh film and began taking pictures around the city. When he developed these new images, the same horrifying pattern emerged. Every person he photographed appeared to be dead in the final image. Not dead as in murdered, but dead as in they had been corpses all along, animated by some unseen force. His girlfriend, Sophia, captured laughing in Central Park, appeared in the photograph with her throat slashed and blood pooling around her feet. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, photographed watering her garden, was revealed to be a skeleton held together by rotting sinew and determination. The terrible truth dawned on Lysander as he stared at photograph after photograph. The camera didn't show people as dead, it showed them as they really were. Everyone around him, everyone in the city, possibly everyone in the world had died long ago. They were all just animated corpses going through the motions of life, unaware of their true state. And now that he knew the truth, he could see it everywhere, without the camera's help. The smell of decay that permeated every crowd, the unnatural movements that mimicked life, the hollow eyes that stared without truly seeing. Lysander took one final photograph, a self-portrait in his bathroom mirror. When he developed it, he saw himself as he truly was, a corpse that had been dead for years, still moving, still thinking, still taking photographs in a world entirely populated by the walking dead. The camera had shown him the ultimate truth, and now there was no escape from it.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out, so subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
Cordelia inherited the music box from her great-aunt Meredith, along with a house full of antiques and the lingering scent of lavender and death. The music box was exquisite, hand-carved rosewood with mother-of-pearl inlays and a tiny ballerina that spun gracefully when wound. The melody it played was hauntingly beautiful, a waltz that seemed to echo with memories of bygone ballrooms and forgotten romance. At first, Cordelia cherished the delicate piece. She placed it on her bedside table and would wind it each evening before sleep, letting the gentle melody soothe away the stress of her demanding job as a forensic accountant. The tiny ballerina, no bigger than her thumb, wore a flowing pink tutu and had the most remarkably detailed face, complete with rosy cheeks, ruby lips, and eyes that sparkled like real sapphires. It was on the 7th night that Cordelia noticed the ballerina's position had changed. Instead of facing forward in her usual pirouette, the tiny dancer was turned toward the bed, as if watching Cordelia sleep. When she wound the music box that evening, the ballerina spun in the opposite direction, her painted smile somehow seeming wider, more knowing. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of grand ballrooms where elegant couples waltzed beneath glittering chandeliers. In the dream, Cordelia was dancing too, wearing a magnificent ball gown that rustled with each step. Her partner was a tall, handsome man with kind eyes and gentle hands. But every time she tried to see his face clearly, the dream would shift and blur. She woke to find the music box playing by itself, the melody slightly off-key and slower than usual. The ballerina continued her eternal dance, but now there were scratch marks on the music box's surface, tiny gouges that looked like they'd been made from the inside. Over the following weeks, the disturbances escalated. Cordelia would wake to find the ballerina facing different directions, sometimes even appearing to have moved to entirely different positions within her small stage. The music would play at odd hours, 3:17 a.m., 4:33 a.m., always when Cordelia was in the deepest stages of sleep. The dreams became more vivid and disturbing. She was still dancing in that ethereal ballroom, but now she could see that the other dancers were wrong somehow. Their movements were too fluid, too perfect, and their eyes never blinked. Her mysterious partner's grip grew tighter each night, his hands cold and unyielding, and she began to notice that his reflection didn't appear in the ballroom's massive mirrors. Research into her great-aunt's history revealed a troubling pattern. Meredith had been found dead in her bedroom, apparently having died peacefully in her sleep. But the coroner's report mentioned unusual findings. Her body was discovered in an elaborate ball gown from the 1920s, her hands positioned as if she were dancing, and her face frozen in an expression of rapturous joy. More disturbing were the stories from Meredith's neighbors. For months before her death, they had reported hearing waltz music coming from her house at all hours of the night, though Meredith lived alone and had no stereo or piano. Some claimed to see shadows dancing past her windows, twirling and spinning in perfect synchronization. The music box, it seemed, had belonged to a woman named Isabella Rousseau, a renowned ballerina from the early 1900s who had died tragically young when her elaborate costume caught fire during a performance. Legend claimed that Isabella's spirit had been trapped within the music box, doomed to dance for eternity, always seeking a partner to join her in death. On her 21st night with the music box, Cordelia made the mistake of winding it one final time. As the melody began to play, she felt an irresistible urge to stand and begin dancing. Her body moved without her conscious control, arms gracefully extended, feet stepping in perfect time to the haunting waltz.
In the mirror across her bedroom, she could see herself dancing, but she wasn't alone. A tall, elegant man in formal evening wear danced beside her, his hands guiding her movements with practiced ease. His face was kind and handsome, just as in her dreams, but his eyes held the hollow emptiness of the grave. As the music box wound down, Cordelia felt her life force being drained away with each note. She was becoming part of the eternal dance, joining Isabella and all the others who had been claimed by the cursed music box over the decades. When her landlord found her 3 days later, Cordelia was positioned in the center of her bedroom, arms extended in a perfect dance pose, her face radiant with otherworldly joy. The music box sat silent on her bedside table, its tiny ballerina now facing away from the bed. But sometimes, late at night, neighbors reported hearing waltz music drifting from the empty apartment and the sound of dancing feet that never seemed to tire.
If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.
Evangeline loved antique mirrors, so when she spotted the ornate Victorian piece at the garage sale, she knew she had to have it. The mirror was magnificent, nearly 6 feet tall, with an elaborate silver frame decorated with cherubs and roses. Despite some discoloration in the glass, it was exactly what she needed for her newly renovated bedroom. The elderly man selling it seemed reluctant to let it go, even for the modest price of $50. "Are you sure you want this particular one?" he asked repeatedly. "I've got others that might suit you better." But Evangeline was smitten with the mirror's gothic beauty and insisted on taking it home immediately. She hung the mirror opposite her bed, where it caught the morning sunlight and made her room appear twice as large. For the first few days, everything seemed perfect. The mirror reflected her image clearly, showing off her vintage clothing collection to full advantage. It was while getting dressed for work on Thursday morning that Evangeline first noticed something odd. In the mirror's reflection, she appeared to be wearing a completely different outfit, a tattered white nightgown instead of her carefully chosen business suit. She spun around quickly, but when she looked back, the reflection matched her clothing perfectly. She dismissed it as a trick of the light, perhaps caused by the mirror's age and the slight warping in the antique glass. But over the following days, the discrepancies became more frequent and disturbing. Sometimes her reflection would appear to be crying, with mascara streaming down her cheeks, while Evangeline herself felt perfectly content. Other times, her mirror image would seem to be screaming, mouth open wide in silent anguish, while Evangeline stood calmly brushing her teeth. Most unsettling of all were the times when her reflection would move independently. Evangeline would be reading in bed, but her mirror image would be standing at the window, staring out into the night with an expression of desperate longing. Sleep became elusive, as Evangeline found herself constantly checking the mirror, trying to catch her reflection in the act of misbehaving. She began covering it with a sheet at night, but would inevitably wake to find the covering had been removed and neatly folded at the foot of her bed. The breakthrough came when Evangeline decided to research the mirror's history. The elderly seller had mentioned it belonged to his late sister, and a quick search of local obituaries revealed the tragic story of Margaret Holloway, who had died by suicide in her bedroom 6 months earlier. According to the police report, Margaret had been found in front of her bedroom mirror, having apparently slashed her wrists while staring at her own reflection. Neighbors reported that Margaret had been acting strangely in the weeks before her death, claiming that her mirror was showing her the truth about herself.
the truth about herself. The phrase echoed in Evangeline's mind that evening as she stared at her own reflection. In the mirror, she saw herself as she was, carefully made up, professionally dressed, confident and successful. But as she watched, her reflection began to change. The mirror showed her the truth she'd been hiding from herself. Her smile faded to reveal the deep sadness she carried after her mother's death. Her confident posture crumpled, showing the insecurity and self-doubt that plagued her daily. Her professional attire dissolved, revealing the vulnerable, frightened woman beneath the carefully constructed facade. But the mirror wasn't finished. As Evangeline continued to stare, her reflection aged rapidly, showing her future self, alone, bitter, surrounded by antiques and memories, but devoid of human connection. She saw herself growing old in isolation, her beauty fading, her career ending in irrelevance, her life ultimately meaningless. The reflection then showed her other possibilities, versions of herself where she'd made different choices. She saw herself happily married, with children, running a successful antiques business, traveling the world, making a difference in others' lives. All the paths she'd chosen not to take, all the opportunities she'd let slip away. Finally, the mirror showed her the darkest truth of all. In the reflection, Evangeline saw herself exactly as Margaret Holloway had been in her final moments, standing in front of this same mirror, razor blade in hand, finally understanding that the only way to stop seeing the truth was to stop seeing altogether. The mirror wasn't cursed. It was simply honest. It showed people exactly who they were, who they could have been, and who they never would be. Some people, like Margaret, couldn't handle that level of truth. But Evangeline was stronger. She smiled at her reflection, acknowledging both her flaws and her potential, and made a decision that would change her life forever. She would live authentically, pursuing the paths the mirror had shown her, refusing to hide behind facades. The mirror continued to show her the truth, but now the truth was of a woman actively working to become the best version of herself. And sometimes, late at night, Evangeline thought she could see Margaret's reflection standing behind her own, smiling with approval, and finally at peace. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out. So subscribe now, before the next nightmare finds you.
Penelope discovered the dollhouse while cleaning out her deceased grandmother's attic. It was an extraordinary piece, a perfect Victorian mansion in miniature, complete with working lights, tiny furniture, and a family of porcelain dolls so lifelike they seemed to breathe. Each doll was exquisitely crafted with real hair, glass eyes, and clothing made from the finest materials. The dollhouse family consisted of 5 members: stern patriarch Harold in his dark suit, elegant mother Constance in her blue silk dress, teenage daughter Victoria with golden ringlets, young son Edmund with his sailor outfit, and baby Charlotte in her christening gown. Their faces were painted with such skill that they seemed capable of genuine emotion. Penelope, a kindergarten teacher with a love for miniatures, decided to keep the dollhouse for her classroom. The children would surely love it, and it would make an excellent teaching tool for storytelling and imaginative play. She set up the dollhouse in the reading corner, carefully arranging the family in their proper rooms. Harold sat in his study reading a newspaper. Constance presided over the dining room tea service. Victoria played piano in the parlor. Edmund tended his toy soldiers in the nursery, and baby Charlotte slept peacefully in her cradle. The first strange incident occurred on a Tuesday morning. Penelope arrived at school to find the dollhouse family had moved during the night. Harold was no longer in his study, but standing in the front hallway, his tiny face turned toward the classroom door. Constance had left her tea service and was positioned at an upstairs window as if watching for something. The children were huddled together in Victoria's bedroom, their small forms arranged as if they were afraid. Assuming the night janitor had accidentally disturbed the display, Penelope rearranged the dolls and thought nothing more of it. But the next morning, they had moved again. This time, the entire family was gathered in the front parlor, positioned around a tiny table as if having a serious family meeting. When Penelope's students arrived, they were immediately fascinated by the dollhouse. 6-year-old Marcus claimed the dolls had waved at him, while Sarah insisted she'd heard baby Charlotte crying. Other children reported seeing the dolls move when no one was looking directly at them. Penelope began staying late to observe the dollhouse, determined to catch whoever was moving the dolls. She set up a small camera to record any nighttime activity, but each morning the memory card would be mysteriously blank, as if the dolls somehow knew they were being watched. The situation escalated when the dollhouse family began leaving their miniature home entirely. Penelope would arrive to find Harold standing on her desk, facing her chair as if waiting for her arrival. Constance would be discovered in the supply closet, carefully arranged among the art supplies. The doll children would be found in various locations around the classroom, always positioned to watch the doorway. Research into the dollhouse's history revealed a chilling connection. The dollhouse was an exact replica of the Weatherby mansion, which had burned down in 1924, killing the entire Weatherby family. The newspaper accounts described the tragedy in horrific detail. How patriarch Harold Weatherby had locked all the doors and windows before setting the fire, trapping his wife Constance and their 3 children inside. The dolls weren't just representations of a generic Victorian family. They were the Weatherby family, somehow bound to their miniature prison, forced to relive their final moments over and over again. But something had changed when the dollhouse was moved to Penelope's classroom. The family had found a way to escape their tiny confines, at least temporarily. They were trying to communicate, to tell their story, to find peace after nearly a century of imprisonment. The breakthrough came when 7-year-old Emma stayed after school to help Penelope clean up. As they worked near the dollhouse, Emma suddenly stopped and tilted her head as if listening to something. "The mommy doll is sad," Emma announced matter-of-factly. "She says Harold hurt them and they can't leave the little house. She wants us to help them go to heaven." Through Emma's innocent connection to the supernatural, Penelope learned the truth. Harold Weatherby hadn't died in the fire as the newspapers reported. He had survived and lived with the guilt of his family's murder for decades. Before his own death, he had commissioned the dollhouse as a way to keep his family's spirits trapped, unable to move on to whatever comes after death. The dollhouse was their prison, beautiful but inescapable. The family had been trying to break free for nearly a century, and now they had found someone willing to help them. Working with Emma as an interpreter, Penelope learned that the family needed someone to acknowledge their suffering, to tell their true story, and to perform a simple ritual that would release them from their miniature hell. On the anniversary of the fire, Penelope and Emma held a memorial service in the classroom. They lit candles for each family member, spoke their names aloud, and formally forgave Harold for his crimes while condemning his actions. As the last candle was extinguished, the dollhouse family moved one final time. They positioned themselves in the front hallway, facing the door, their tiny hands raised in gestures of farewell. Then, one by one, they simply faded away, leaving behind empty clothes and peaceful expressions. The dollhouse remained in Penelope's classroom, but it was just a dollhouse now. Beautiful, detailed,
but no longer inhabited by tormented spirits. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, children would claim to hear faint sounds of laughter coming from the tiny rooms, as if a happy family was finally at play in their perfect miniature world.
If these stories sent chills down your spine,
Don't vanish into the darkness without hitting that like button. Share your scariest experience in the comments below, because your story might be featured next. And remember, the scariest thing is missing out, so subscribe now before the next nightmare finds you.